Welcome everyone to the Toku Portal podcast. It's me, Zero here. Vashi was here, but unfortunately I decided to show up late because something came up and... No, he's not, which is fine. We'll talk about this episode in the next episode when we do the podcast, so I'll try to keep this quick. Maybe like 20 minutes or so. I mean, it's not that it's a bad episode. It's actually a pretty good episode. It's just kind of one of those episodes you want to talk about with somebody. So, yeah, my bad, everyone. I fucked up the timing on this, and that's why no other people are here. Yeah. Sorry about that. Anyway, welcome, everyone, to episode 19 of Saber. Yeah, so like I said, this was actually a pretty decent episode, surprisingly. I mean, it's the writer for this episode is Takuro Fukada, and the director is Hidenori Ishida. Yeah. And basically, yeah, those two. So like the lead writer for Ghost, and what is the director? Oh man, wow. He's been directing since Kuga. Like a long time. Like, wow. that run is insane. Yeah, so like, holy crap, man. That that run of working on so many rider shows. But anyway, yeah, that probably explains why this again looks more like Kamen Rider. Where I mean, like, it's nothing amazing, but you know, it looks like standard Rider, which is nice. As for this episode, I guess this episode has a couple small parts. So it's got the stuff in the beginning with Yuri and Toma and Mae, and then it's got the southern base stuff, and then it's got a little bit with the editor and stuff, editor-in-chief, and then you have the main fight. I mean, there's some other small scenes, but basically those are like the four major elements in this episode. I guess we'll get the simple one out of the way. Yeah, I mean, like, the fight's actually pretty good. I mean, like, it's interesting. Yeah, because like, there's... I mean, you could talk a lot more about the fight in this episode, but I'm just gonna make this quick. And it's like, yeah, it was a solid fight, and like, the villain is a person who's really into, I guess, like, dioramas and stuff, which is cool. And he saw, like, Toma in the magazine, and that's why he came to visit. So that's pretty cool too. But he basically gets turned into a monster. He's trying to create his own kingdom, sort of thing. He's using cars as the building blocks, which is interesting, I guess. But it's like, yeah, like, he's just sort of there. He doesn't really fight, which is a little interesting, I guess, because he doesn't like fighting. He just wants to build, which is cool. Oh man, I forget his name. Legio, I think, is the commander in this episode. I just closed the website too. Yeah, let me find. So basically, like, the general is pretty much just there selecting people, and infected him, and he comes in to defend them because one time they fight and he runs away, and the general person is like, yeah, good, like, there's no reason to fight, just keep becoming more complete, right? Like, that's pretty interesting. And god, what am I talking about? Episode 19. Sorry. So, Storios is the main villain in this, or like the main villain of who's like active. I mean, I guess all three of them are sort of active, but he's the like one sending on the monsters or protecting the monster this episode. So he's there. It's interesting. And then he comes back for the second fight, and he's again pretty strong. He's got like that like duplication technique, but Yuri's pretty good at like dealing with that. But then Slash pretty much asks him, is like, where the hell is Sophia? We know you took her. And he's like, wait, what? Sophia's missing? I was like, that's pretty interesting. Like, even they didn't know. Which I wonder if that's going to have an impact, because now they know that the Norden base is undefended, but it's like, there's like pretty much nothing there. I mean, maybe there's something there, but like for the most part, like all the belts and books and stuff are in the southern base, so I doubt they have too much. I mean, technically they have equipment, so that could potentially lead to something. We'll see what happens. But that was interesting. Like, that's one of those things. Like, this episode actually is surprisingly good at like adding a lot more to the story, like a lot of different elements. But yeah, so the monster of the week fight and the like lead villain, they're sort of there. You kind of just see them being active in the world and protecting their monster. They don't really do too much, but like, you know, for what they're in this episode for, they did a decent job with them. As for like, you know, like the human character that you have to save, like, again, they did an okay job. You don't get too much about them, but you get enough, and that's fine. As for like Saber and Sword of Light in the fight, they're pretty good. I mean, like, you definitely see how like Saber's gotten stronger, and like I love how like the Sword of Light is like, oh cool, like this Swordsman of Sound is pretty strong, and it's like, oh, he learned like a technique almost watching him. I was like, oh, that's cool. Because that's sort of his Sword of Light's thing, is like he's pretty curious, which is great. But the main surprise of this episode, I guess, is that like you get to see how strong Slash is, and it's like, oh right, he's from the past generation, like he can actually hold his own, right? So that's pretty cool that you actually see how skilled of a fighter he actually is, which kind of makes sense, because I think, again, like, he's pretty much undefeated at this point. Like, he doesn't feel like he's that strong because he's not like cocky or anything, but like, yeah, whenever he gets serious, he's pretty tough, which is cool to see. Like, he might not have held his own against like Saber in like full new upgrade form, but Saber didn't go fully all out in his new upgrade form against him, because, you know, he had to go save the kid, right? Like the high schooler. Which makes sense. Like, that's a proper way of doing it, because like there's no point in having that fight, because like if Saber wins, then you're like, of course he won, he's got the upgrade. And if Slash wins, then it's like, what's the point of this upgrade? Slash won, right? So it's better not to even have that fight, which was smart. Yeah, but otherwise, like, Slash in this episode is freaking great, man. Like, you actually get to see how good he is at fighting. I mean, like, Saber's pretty damn good in this too, but Slash, you definitely see he's on another level. I like how when like the Sword of Light and Slash are fighting, and then like the Sword of Light does techniques and like Slash counters them. That was really well done. And then even how like the Sword of Light, it's like, oh, Shadow Form's not gonna work. So I was like, oh, that is so cool. Anyway, so yeah, pretty much for the fights were solid. Right. Then I guess we can talk about I guess we can do like Yurime and Toma and the editor-in-chief. So like I love the like cute little moments of scenes of, well, sort of, where it's like it just continues from last episode where it's like May's like, are you serious with this? It's like, come on, man, you could have told us. And like Toma's like, ah, man, I totally didn't figure that's what you actually meant. And it's like, oh, it's just sort of like it's kind of bad at communicating, which is just funny. And I love how he like keeps looking at May's like phone, trying to figure out what it is, because he's so curious. And then like later on, Yuri, when when like the high schooler comes in to meet Toma and stuff, he starts reading the book. He's like, oh, I finally get this thing now. This is pretty cool. I was like, that's so great, man. Like, Yuri's such a good character. Like, since he's shown up, like, the show's gotten so much more personality. Like, everybody kind of has a thing now. I mean, I guess they always sort of had, but, like, he kind of completes the dynamic. Like, it's such a good flow with him, Toma, and May. Yeah, like, so that's what I was saying. Like, this, the stuff that's missing in the show is, like, it's not just pure plot. It's little character moments like that really add to the show. And then like I love how he like totally like hides away and tries to steal May's phone to figure out what's going on with it, but it rings and May's like, how did you get my phone? Like, she's having none of it. It's like, oh, that's great. But you also learn like Toma might not be saying everything he remembers, where it's like he says like, oh, Luna's the one who taught me like the love of reading and whatnot, and then he also says that like and then like they're talking, and then Yuri later says like, oh, maybe she's special because she connected the two worlds, and that's sort of the same thing that like the original Caliber said. So it's like something's going on there. Also, like Toma, like May is like, oh, it was the enemy who put her in that position which got her trapped. Like, you shouldn't blame yourself. And then like Toma sort of like cuts himself off. Like, maybe he knows, like he remembers doing something by accident and that caused all this. So, you know, a lot of good setup, a lot of good like small character moments this episode. Honestly, it did a lot better than what this show usually does. So like, good for the show. We're finally back on the good track. I mean, like, it had a couple decent string of episodes a little while earlier, but again, I guess this is the next set. Also, it just kind of feels like this is more of like what Saber sort of should be. Like, it's a lot more streamlined, but like it still gets more character development. Also, it helps that they can go out and stuff, so like the sets aren't all super samey. But they go and they meet the editor-in-chief lady, and then it's interesting where she's like asking all these questions like, what the hell was all that? And like May and Toma are just like totally denying it, like, oh, what are you talking about? None of that happened, or whatever. And like Yuri goes up and like touches her, and like she glows, and then nothing. So like, what did he do? Did he like touch her and explain what's going on, or did he wipe her memories? I'm guessing he just wiped her memories, which is kind of I will say there's one annoyance with this episode. It's got a little bit too much plot like convenience. Like, Yuri can do just pretty much anything the plot wants, and it just like makes everything super easy, which I kind of don't like, but I'm like, it's fine, whatever. Like, I'm not gonna be too upset about it. I'm not super in love with it, but what are you gonna do? Right. Especially because like now, like Toma and these guys don't really have like an intelligence network, so they don't really know how to find the monsters or anything. It's just like, oh, whenever they appear, the book just glows. So they're like, oh, you can go talk to Rintaro, but they're like, he's in the southern base, he's not going to talk to us. So at least they're acknowledging that, but then I guess it kind of links to like how I guess the news, or like the editor-in-chief, or like news feeds or whatever, are gonna replace that. So it's almost like a Ryuki esque situation, which is weird because I didn't think this was a newspaper, but I don't know. Maybe they're trying to go with like a Ryuki angle on this, and like these characters will get a little more incorporated. I mean, that would, I guess, make sense with the intro and stuff changing. Whatever, we'll see. It'll be interesting. At least they're getting more play. I do love in that scene where it's like you see like the editor-in-chief just asking them questions, and one, they're like super denying it. But you also see Yuri in the foreground just like messing around with appliances because he's like, no, he has no idea what the hell they are. That's so great, man. Like, see, that's like good directing, cute shit like that. Like small moments really elevates an episode. Yeah. So, but basically, I've talked about like all the major components, but the real interesting stuff happens now, which is like what are all the stuff that happened with the southern base, because you figure out that like Yuri says, or basically the Sword of Light says like, yeah, like the Sword of Logos is a little messed up because it's like it's not operating like it should. Like there should be a southern, north and southern base, and the books and the belts should be scattered. Right, it's to make sure that like the power, like basically that like super powerful book doesn't get formed, right? But now the northern base is basically shut down, and all of them are sitting around the southern base. Also, like does the southern base have like no riders? Like that's so fucking weird. Like how do you operate a base with no combatants? Like what's the point of being a base with no swordsmen? Whatever. Maybe some of them will show up. I mean, like the southern base commander person was on the phone. Maybe she was talking to the villains. I'm guessing she's talking to the villains, but maybe she's talking to her own people. We'll see. So yeah, Yuri's pretty much like, yeah, there's something going on. This is not the right dynamic. It's like with all the books gathered in the southern base, it's pretty easy to concentrate all that power and make, like pretty much just set up like the end game sort of thing, where it's like, yeah, this is just kind of a situation that bad things can happen. So, and then it just cuts to a southern base, and it's like, oh fuck, man, that place is so gloomy looking. Like, Jesus, it's like, oh, the most depressing base layout. Like the lighting is terrible. I mean, it's not terrible. It's like it's decent lighting, but like the decor is so dark, and like the mood is so down, and like Rintaro is kind of conflicted because he doesn't think Toma's totally a bad guy, but like he doesn't really know what to do because like Toma just protected a monster, right? And then like Green is like so going at him because he's like, what the fuck, why are you trusting like Kento's killer, right? Word, like, what is this shit? And then Buster is pretty much just trying to like play mediator and try to keep the team together at this point and just like calm them down. I love, and then like later on him and Slash kind of had that like moment to talk in like underground hallway, whatever, and they're like, and Slash like, yeah, I have to go figure out what the hell's going on, because he's like, well, one of the primordial swords just said like something's wrong with the organization. It's the Sword of Light, so I don't think the Sword of Light's lying. So I have to go figure out what's going on. And Buster's like, okay, you go do that. I'll handle these guys. And so I'm like, oh, that's great. Like I love how like intelligent and mature and chill they are about all this. Like that's good characterization, like they're being used well. Like all the characters honestly in this episode are being used well. I will say like they toned up Yuri's like curiosity gimmick quite a bit in this episode. Maybe tone it down just a little bit, but other than that, like also like Yuri's like super Deus Ex Machina for the most part. Maybe tone that down a little bit, but like whatever. I'm fine with it for the most part. Like it wasn't terrible, so I'll let it slide. But yeah, it's getting to like a little too convenient. But again, like, this episode was actually fairly solid. Like, I want to see part 2 now because things are in motion, right? Like, Southern Base is doing something. Now the bad guys know that Sophia's not in the Northern Base. Slash and Buster kind of have their doubts. Rentro's on the fence. Green is basically ready to fucking murder the shit out of Saber at this point. And it seems that he's gonna finally get his chance next episode, so it'll be interesting. Like, a lot of emotions and stuff going on, a lot of good character development, a lot of good, I mean, like, decently shot. So, like, again, Saber's actually gotten decent as a show. Again, as for speculation, like, at this point, like, I just hope the show just keeps going on this. Like, obviously, like, the only real thing to speculate at this point is, like, who's the Southern Base is working with. Like, is it just the villains, or are there, like, swordsmen in the Southern Base and maybe they'll make a move? So we'll see. But it's pretty interesting. Yeah, anyway, like, it's a good episode, people. Go watch it. Yeah, but that's all I got. I mean, I could talk more, but then it'd be just kind of rambling, going in circles, and let's not waste time doing that. It'd be more interesting if I had somebody else to bounce things with, but, you know, I fucked up, screwed up the time, and therefore wasted everybody else's time. And here I am just talking to myself. Anyway, rambling now. Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining me. And tune in tomorrow for the Sentai podcast. I guess that got moved to Thursday too. But yeah, we'll see what happens next episode of Saber on next week Tuesday, or next week Wednesday. And Super Sentai Cure Major is getting close to its end game. I hear that's pretty solid too. So hey, for the first week in a long ass time, maybe we'll get 2 good episodes of 2 Toei shows in 1 week. We'll see, but I guess tune into the Sentai podcast to figure out if that's what happened. But again, thanks everyone for joining me. So this is Zero, signing out. Catch you next time.